I'm doing a series of video blogs following up from my special report to the Legislative Assembly recently on the lack of capacity at the Ministry of Natural Resources and the Ministry of Environment to do their jobs, to complete their mandates. By capacity, I mean the money and the people and the expertise necessary to complete a task. And the report argues that these ministries have been chronically underfunded for a long, long time, and now it's showing in performance. To back that up, I produced a number of case studies, and these blogs are intended to just give you a quick outline of what's in those case studies, and of course encourage you to go to the website and read the thing in detail. Today I want to talk about the Ministry of Natural Resources and their obligations regarding parks. Probably better than parks, it should be protected areas, protected lands, because of course there are provincial parks, which most people know. There are also things called conservation reserves, and there's some natural areas called wilderness areas in the province as well. Back in 1954, when the Parks Act was first passed, there were 8 provincial parks. That's all, and the task was more modest. Now, presently, we have, I think it's 392 provincial parks, and 329 provincial parks, 292 conservation reserves, and 10 wilderness areas. So the amount of work involved has expanded immensely. And of course the public expects to have these protected lands protected. We expect the ecosystems to be protected. We expect it to be managed in a sustainable way for future generations. A funny thing's been happening in parks. You would think with a big expansion and responsibility like that would come with a big expansion in monies expended to look after them. In fact, from 1992 to 2007, the government allocation of spending for parks actually decreased by 73%. That's an immense cut. And of course, there's got to be more to the story, because that doesn't make sense on the own. And then of course there is more to the story. What it was, the government decided, well, they set up what they call special purposes account, just a bank account essentially, and of course they charge fees. They go camp at a provincial park, you pay a fee, and there's certain corporate revenues from advertising and such things. All that money goes into the special purpose account and goes to support the parks. And the objective of the government is to make the park system self-sustaining. In other words, to raise enough money from fees, user fees and corporate donations and advertising, what have you, to pay the whole way for all the costs of running the parks and the conservation reserves and the wilderness areas. But there's a problem. It's a big problem. The problem is that, of course, not all the parks are what we call operating parks. They don't all have campsites. They don't have people there. They don't have gates and people collecting money. In fact, great numbers of them up in Northern Ontario are parks and wilderness areas preserved, specifically to preserve the natural heritage features of the site, and they don't intend to put campsites in them. They don't intend to collect any money. But if you have a parks and protected areas system that's based on, the funding is potentially 100% based on fees, and there are no fees collected from a whole bunch of the parks, those wilderness parks, of course, are going to fall by the wayside and be neglected because there's no revenue stream, and that's what we're seeing. There's not enough money going in to look after the needs of the non-operating parks in particular. There's not enough money going into looking after the needs of the operating parks, let alone the non-operating parks. So what do I mean? Well, there's a requirement to do planning and management activities in the parks, and these plans are mostly sadly behind or inadequate or not done at all. As well, even in the operating parks, the constraints on budgets are so tight. Their staff were laid off again last year. That infrastructure is not being supported. Probably the best example that people can identify with is in Presqu'île Park in Lake Ontario, which is one of the best places in the province to go see the migration of birds. If you're a birder, wonderful to see all the birds come across the lakes in the spring or on the way out in the fall. Well, there's a boardwalk through the marsh in Presqu'île Park. It's been closed since 2005. You can't walk on the boardwalk in the marsh. You can look at birds because it's in disrepair. It's dangerous, and there's no money to fix the boardwalk in Presqu'île Park. That's the kind of infrastructure problem that was a little bit more public, but very subtle things happen. Buildings wear down, roofs have to be repaired, etc. So the infrastructure of the parks is not being maintained the way it should. and of course, I've mentioned in the non-operating parks. And now there's a new piece of legislation called the Provincial Parks and Conservation Reserves Act, came out in 2006, and it sets goals for ecological integrity, for to preserve the ecological integrity of the park. It says that the park should be managed to preserve the biodiversity. These are increased responsibilities in an increased number of parks, and we haven't seen any kind of increase in allocation of money. I mean, I think certainly the people that are using the parks for camping and things should pay fees. I do that myself. That's absolutely worthwhile, and that money should go to the parks, of course. But there are other costs associated with having a park system in the province of Ontario, or a protected land system in the province of Ontario. And if we're to achieve sustainability in the long term, if we're to protect the ecological integrity of these lands as is intended, then we have to get a little more funding, a little more capacity in the parks areas of the Ministry of Natural Resources.